great. We've got a few questions. We got one from John Astorino. Says, I am curious on the criteria / decisions to have operations folks in each group or team versus a centralized. So it sounds like he's asking a question around how do we decide who's a part of that, and where are the, I would assume, kind of the touch points and kind of that connective tissue, or your partner rather, across the organization. Curious if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I mean, we definitely have an ops role in all of our major parts of the organization. So as I mentioned, finance, product, sales, CX,
engineering.
Thank you. Sorry. And we meet once a week as a team, and we talk about what's going on and what our priorities are and what the impact to each other could be. Before, like maybe a few years ago, the only organization that had an operations role was sales. So it made it a struggle, because then obviously the sales priorities were the things that were focused on, where now sales priorities are still very focused on, CX priorities are focused, every group in the organization has that opportunity to focus on the priorities and work together. We're not stepping on each other's toes. A lot of times finance, we have a great idea about how we should do something because we're having a problem doing it. And so it's great having those different representatives from each of the organizations. We do meet a lot. Like I said, we meet once a week, and when there's a big project going on, we'll meet even more than that. So spend a lot of time talking to each other. So hopefully you like everyone.
Yeah.
But if I could add to that too, I mean, I personally think that the concept of RevOps is a little tough as one unit that's separate from all the lines of business that have to support the customer and the sales. And the reason I say that is not because all the technical stuff can't get done, because it can. The analysis, the insights, the data process, all that can get done. But there's a whole other side to ops, which is Bettina and I are partners. She is my strategist. We work closely together on way more than just systems and data and insights. It's about how the teams are structured, where things are working, where they're not. You've got the same thing with a great sales ops leader, right? They're the right-hand person to the chief revenue officer, chief sales officer, whatever it is. And they are literally strategizing on the plan for the organization, not just the tools and technology. So and different people have different perspectives and opinions on that, but my sense is that some pieces of that can be centralized, some of them can't. And what I don't want is it to become more and more like IT. And not to say anything bad about IT, but they are there to do a very specific thing. And I need a business strategist to really be by my side. There's a continuum in between too, I recognize.
I do think it's important, whichever route you go. I think there's pros and cons in both. I do think it's important that if people are building across systems, especially building in systems that are touching Salesforce, that everybody should follow the same process on that. So if there's something where you've got ops leaders from other parts of the organization who are going and building, they should be following one standard process for building in Salesforce, for releasing into Salesforce, et cetera, because that's where, and I've seen this before, where you've got an ops leader on the sales side going building their own thing, ops leader on the CS side going building their own thing, not talking together, and you get something that doesn't match well when it comes into
that's where you need IT governance, right? So that is the powerful part of an IT team being part of that unified group in Higher Logic that Bettina talked about. Is IT is part of that. And they bring that process to bear, which is super valuable in making sure that we have a high fidelity internal product.
Yeah, that's great. And I know this kind of touches on Ben. Ben had a question, and thanks for the compliment, Ben, on my mustache. When does he's asking, when does this become a business insights team versus any other team? And I hear what you're saying, Jay, is you really need that strategist person who can be data driven to really be there from a high level. And I know from my experience, I think isolating data engineering and just seeing that as an IT function and as a as a more transactional relationship, I think you'd be remiss to, you're missing opportunities to really understand, where do we want to go, and how is the data going to support us to get there, and so that becomes, because the reality is we must be data driven to be successful, but we can't just be laser focused on data and looking for the silver bullet within that. We need to have strategies and have that all work together. So in my opinion, I think the business insights team must live and be a supporting arm for those individual leaders throughout the organization, versus it just being a shop where folks are able to crank out pretty dashboards, because then you get in the business of, you have an individual who might feel that their job is to produce really pretty dashboards that shine and have a lot of flash and sizzle, but they may not feel the onus to ask, why is this being used, or they may not have the exposure to understand who's, and so they just start tossing things over the line. And so that, I think that connective tissue and really making sure you have the right folks embedded in the right areas is key.